The Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson has said there's no way that Russia will lose because you can't say no to someone who doesn't have any scruples. And the flip side to that, and I think you can really see it by being here in Ukraine, is the spirit of people who refuse to put up with that, who refuse to let that type of evil stand, and who refuse to submit to it.
We go live to Ukraine and Joseph Lindsley. And Joseph, we were talking yesterday about how this terrible war can end someday. And I see that the foreign minister of Ukraine just said that real peace will only be achieved by restoring the country's borders and taking back Crimea. That is a major point of President Zelensky, isn't it?
Yeah, Bob, good afternoon from Lviv. It's a major point, not only of President Zelensky, but of almost every single person here in Ukraine. In fact, early on in Russia's full-scale invasion, remember, Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, but in the full-scale invasion last year, after, I think it was in May, a year ago, President Zelensky suggested that there could be some kind of peace while putting the Crimea question on hold. And he said this in one speech. And the Ukrainian society immediately responded. They began to respond by criticizing that on social media. And then President Zelensky, walked back from that position because it's very clear that the people will not support that. And the reason is looking at, when Russia took the Crimean Peninsula in 2014, the response from the world was pretty weak. It was sort of a slap on the wrist for the Putin regime. There even was a World Cup held in Russia while Russia was occupying Ukrainian territory during that time period. And so Ukrainians say, that what that did is it gave Russia 8 years to prepare for this full-scale invasion. And so Ukrainians say never again, that cannot be an option. And meanwhile, today, I think it was today, the Russian spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry, she said that no one from Kyiv has offered an Easter truce. And she said, because, Easter is coming this weekend here in this part of the world. She said, this is unlikely to happen given the belligerent attitude demonstrated by the Kyiv regime, that it wants to continue hostilities. And the two things to point out there, one, Russia often says the Kyiv regime, but there is no Kyiv regime. There really is. This is a democracy, and Ukrainians do not want to live in Russian tyranny. They like a society with free speech and every freedom you could imagine. And they don't want that. And, from all the stories we've seen from, those who've survived the occupation in Kherson, I've spoken with many people from there. When Russia controls your city and your area, there is no freedom. And no one here wants that, not even for a second.
We talked yesterday about the horrible beheading of a Ukrainian soldier, and European leaders have condemned that. And you mentioned yesterday, Joseph, that this was something that the Russians wanted everyone to see. But I was thinking about that all day yesterday. I don't understand why they would want that out there.
Yeah, I think it's hard for civilized people to comprehend this, but this is exactly the sort of enemy that Russia is to civilization and the free world, especially so. In the fighting around Bakhmut, much of that fighting has been done by the Wagner Group, which is a Russian mercenary group run by a guy who's called the personal chef to Vladimir Putin. They're known for being especially ruthless, and we've seen that. They've turned Bakhmut, they've destroyed it. In fact, I just saw a photo of Wagner waving their banner in the Bakhmut City Hall, but the City Hall is destroyed. What glory is there in taking something that you totally ruined? And so the Russians, I think, when you see sort of a disconnection from reality, but they believe that these things will scare the West, scare Ukrainians into submission. And it's amazing that they still believe that. You think of when I've been in the city of Kharkiv, which has been hit by so many missiles. The goal of Russia seemed to be to scare people away, and the people are still there. It doesn't work, but Russia still tries this. And these are, ancient tactics going back to Soviet times. And, speaking of Crimea, I was talking yesterday with some young Ukrainian activists who are working on the liberation of Crimea and trying to cultivate dissidents there. And you hear all the stories of these atrocities that happened in Soviet times, and Russia. There has not been a cultural reckoning, I think, with the atrocities even of Stalin, and so they continue to live in this sort of frame of existence. And a very strange note of history on this score: Vladimir Putin's grandfather, Spiridon Putin, was a chef, and he became chef to Joseph Stalin. So the Putin family has been serving. Stalin was one of the worst mass murderers in human history, and so Putin was connected at the highest levels. His family was connected to that regime, and then even more strangely, when Putin's grandfather was young, he was a chef at a top restaurant in Moscow, at a top hotel. I think it was the Hotel Astoria in Moscow, and reportedly he served Gregory Rasputin, the shady monk that many think that helped bring down the czars and initiated the Bolshevik Revolution. So Putin's grandfather had connections to Rasputin and to Stalin, and we see that this is, and even this past week in the monastery in in Kiev, this ancient 1,000-year-old monastery, finally the Russian Orthodox monks were evicted, and because there was evidence going back to the days of Stalin that Stalin had created that church, which had previously been banned under communism, as an arm of the KGB. And the photographs, when these monks were evicted, they destroyed huge parts of the campus of this ancient church. We don't know if they were living like that or they destroyed it out of spite. But everywhere we see, the touch of Russia, we see destruction and violence, and that's a society that has permitted this war to continue.
That is really interesting about the history of Putin's family. I had never heard that. All we hear about Putin is his past with the KGB. That is fascinating. And this business of the atrocities and the Russian feeling that it's good for them that the world sees this, I think it has the opposite effect, and it garners more support for the Western world and the support of Ukraine. Don't you?
I think it does with regular people of goodwill throughout the world. But I mean, what we do see, I think you can see, as we talked about yesterday, a weakening of will sometimes. With the French president, for example, and when you see a regime, and for example, the Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson has said there's no way that Russia will lose because you can't say no to someone who doesn't have any scruples. And so there are people who sort of buy that argument. And the flip side to that, and I think you can really see it by being here in Ukraine, is the spirit of people who refuse to put up with that, who refuse to let that type of evil stand, and who refuse to submit to it. And so the great question in this battle is which virtue will be stronger, the will to destroy or the will to resist and to live freely. And that's really what this is about. And we have, I think, as we look at all the different scenarios around the world right now, here between Ukraine and Russia, even though many Ukrainians speak Russian, you have the most horizontal, sort of democratic, free-minded society versus the most totalitarian, helpless, society that the people in Russia only exist sort of, everything is in reference to Putin, to their leader. And so you have these two extremes meeting here, and this it really is. It's a battle of for the ages in a way. And I think also I saw a video of the Ukrainian soldiers who were training in the United Kingdom, and they finished their training and they were loaded up on buses, leaving for the airport to make their way back here to fight. And there's maybe for about almost a mile, the British soldiers are lined up on either side of this pastoral road in England, and they're all saluting the Ukrainians. And knowing that, it's Ukrainians who are, the Brits are helping, as are many others, but you could really feel that knowing that the Ukrainians are the ones going to stand up to this evil. And I think of even, allusions to the Lord of the Rings, like, the fellowship of people, getting help from the elves, say, and other places, and then going into Mordor and to fight. And when you look at places like Bakhmut, that's exactly what it is. And even there's news today that 2 American volunteers who chose to come here were killed in the fighting, killed by the Russians in Bakhmut. And so it is this epic struggle of good and evil.
Joseph Lindsley, we, as always, appreciate the reporting, your insight, and the history lesson. Until tomorrow.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages. That's very important that much more people can get more information about the situation here and how everybody can help Ukraine to stay stronger and to save all the world.
Что он сказал?
Well, which side are you on?
На чьей ты стороне?
Come on now. Oh, which side are you on?
На чьей ты стороне?
Ебать.